I didn't think a wedding could start with champagne and end with a phone call from a pilot. But it did on the very day I thought everything would go as planned. Flowers, blooming music, playing Family United. Instead, my grandfather, who flew over 8 hours just to attend, was seated by my mother next to the trash bin at the back of the hall, where the smell of leftover food was stronger than the apathy. And me, I got slapped by my grandmother in the middle of the ceremony for a poorly timed, poorly aimed remark. I didn't cry. I just stood there amidst the wedding flowers and whispers with a red mark on my face and my pride broken in two. It seemed like it would end there until the sound of jet engines roared in the distance. A private plane was landing on the lawn out back. No one understood what was happening. But I knew my grandfather had prepared for this day. And the moment he stepped out of that plane, the silence began to crumble. I discovered it on a Tuesday morning while brewing coffee in my small kitchen overlooking San Francisco Bay. Sunlight slanted across the stone countertop, grazing the screen of my just-opened laptop. There was an email from my mother Margaret with an unremarkable subject line, RE, regarding the taxes on the Western property. I clicked to check a technical detail, but at the bottom of the email she'd inadvertently included a chain of attached messages. And there, like a rusty nail pressed into my palm, was something I wasn't meant to see. RE guest list for this family gathering. I opened it. Simple as that. No warning, no password. Just a list of names for the family gathering next weekend in Napa Valley. Madeline, my sister, of course. Uncle John, Aunt Clara, Cousin Beth, both of Cousin Richard's kids. They were all there. My name was not. The first feeling was coldness. Not surprise, but confirmation. This wasn't the first time I'd been left out of that familiar circle. This was the 10th. 10 gatherings, Thanksgivings, Christmases, weddings. I always found out through social media or secondhand stories like an outsider briefed on a party not meant for them. My name is Ellie, 34 years old, a financial analyst in San Francisco. I have a cat named Klaus, a 3-page investment portfolio, and a family I'm no longer sure I belong to. I scrolled down the email, my eyes catching a brief note my mother wrote to Madeline. Make sure to prepare the grilled meat. Eliza likes Ellie's not coming, so don't worry. My name wrong. It felt like being replaced by a shadow no longer real. Eliza. Was that me, or a memory they once had but no longer cared to recall? I didn't cry. I just poured coffee into a mug, watching it spill over and run down the sink. No one died. No one fought. I was just erased quietly and thoroughly. That afternoon I called my mother. She didn't pick up. I left a voicemail. I saw the list. I understand. I won't bother you anymore. I didn't wait for her to call back. A week later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. The delivery person handed it to me with an oddly formal air. Inside was a wedding invitation for Thomas, my half-brother. I wasn't close to Thomas, but I still thought I'd be invited. The invitation didn't bear my name. It read, "Dear Guest." I gave a faint smile. When I called Madeline to ask, she said, "You don't have to come, but if you want to, it's fine." A reluctant invitation tossed out like a bone for a dog. I understood. I wasn't welcome. But I booked a flight to Napa anyway, not because I wanted to attend the wedding. I went because I could no longer be the silent shadow standing outside the family photo. And if you've ever been in a moment like that when your heart aches to be seen, to be acknowledged, then you know some journeys don't begin with love. They begin with the courage to reclaim yourself. I wasn't planning to check Zillow that day. I was just looking for a weekend getaway in Monterey, a brief escape from the reluctant invitation to Thomas's wedding. But then, in the recommended for you section, an image stopped me cold. A weathered silver roof, a white balcony, wooden railings faded by the sea. Something achingly familiar. Below the image, coastal home in South Carolina. 2 bedrooms, 1 attic, negotiable price. I recognized the house instantly. No need to read the address. It was my father's house. Or at least it used to be. It appeared like a torn stitch on an unhealed scar. I clicked for details. The living room had new furniture, but the kitchen window still bore the E-notch my father carved with a pocket knife when I was 9. I remembered that night, clearly the sea wind howling as he told me people forget easily. But this mark will stay here forever. Now that house was on the internet measured in square feet and dollars. My mother hadn't told me about selling it. No message, no warning. Just unused property ready for transfer. I wasn't shocked. Not really. It just felt like someone was dismantling my memories brick by brick and selling them by the lot. Have you ever felt that when a place once sacred becomes a commodity? Share with me. I believe I'm not alone in this. I looked at the photos of the house, the hallway corner where I used to sit with my father eating bagels every Saturday morning, the windowsill where he placed a model ship he'd built by hand, now described in terms like potential display nook or ideal for seasonal rental investment. They didn't know that windowsill was the only place I dared cry after my mother scolded me for dropping a glass. I remembered a dawn when my father took me to the beach. The sky was still deep purple, and he said, "Think in tides, not waves." I didn't understand then. I just nodded as if I did. But now I think he meant live, with the rhythm of things that endure, not the noisy waves that crash and vanish. I placed my hand on the only seashell I'd kept, ivory spiraled like a whisper. His last gift. Then I opened my laptop and sent an email to the law office handling the sale. I wrote, "I'm Ellie Ventnor. I used to live at 42 Seaside Bluff. I'd like to schedule a viewing." Part of me didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't going to buy it, I didn't have the money. But I needed to see it, to check if everything I once had still existed, or if it had been erased from life as I had been from that email list. 2 days later, I got a reply. The lawyer wrote, "We were surprised to receive your email. The inheritance records only list Margaret and Madeline as legal representatives. No one else." I wasn't surprised. I just felt cold. I requested a copy of the notarized documents. In them, under the section for legal heirs, only Madeline's name appeared. Mine didn't. No comma, no strike-through. Just absent. I sank to the floor sunlight, filtering through the glass. A sense of displacement crept into every crevice of my lungs. My mother had done this. She didn't need to yell or disown me outright. She just left my name out of the blank, and the law took care of the rest. You might think I should be angry, but strangely, I wasn't. I just felt a quiet ache, like someone had strangled the memories I'd held with both small hands, and now they were falling shattering. My father died when I was 12. After that, everything about him faded. My mother packed his photos away. No one mentioned the South Carolina summers anymore. The beach house went unnamed. I thought that was how they let him go again this time for good. But I'm still here. I'm a witness. I'm a part of him. And I won't let that part be erased. I placed the seashell back in the wooden box under my bed and booked a flight to Charleston. Uninvited, I'd return to that house. Not to claim anything, but to confirm whether I'd truly lost everything, or if I was just being convinced that memories don't matter. If there was a sound to signal a shift in my life, it wasn't thunder or a grand declaration. It was the phone ringing at 6 a.m. on a Monday. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in years, Savannah Lynn. Savannah and I were best friends at Stanford a distant time when we believed justice could be defined by contract clauses and numbers. She pursued law. I veered into finance. We lost touch, but I always remembered her unflinching gaze, the way she never shied from the truth, no matter how cold. I'd sent her a message the night before after poring over every page of my father's will. My name wasn't there. But a faint blue ink note, nearly faded by time, mentioned a fallback clause. I didn't fully understand it, but instinct told me this wasn't accidental. Savannah called back almost immediately. "I think you should know," she said after I sent her the scanned will. "There's a fallback clause." I sat up in bed. What does that mean? It means if the primary heirs, your mother and sister, fail to maintain property taxes or insurance for 24 consecutive months, management rights transfer to the next designated heir in the original document. And that's you, Ellie. Your name is there. Notarized. I went silent. Savannah continued. "I don't know why your name was removed from the recent official disclosure, but the original, the legally binding one, names you as the fallback heir. If no one's paid taxes or maintained insurance on that house for 2 years, technically management rights shift to you." I asked Savannah to check the house's financial history. Half a day later, she called back. "No tax payment since February 2 years ago. Home insurance was canceled last spring. It qualifies." I exhaled slow and long. Something in me, a part silent for years, was stirring awake. "So what can I do now?" "You can file to claim property management rights under the fallback clause, and you don't need to notify anyone. I can handle all the paperwork. You just sign." We scheduled a Zoom call that evening. Savannah was still the girl I knew, hair neatly tied, eyes cold and sharp from years among legal clauses. But her voice softened at the end. "I never thought you'd be cut out like this. But it seems your father didn't forget you like everyone thought." After the call, I opened the wooden box under my bed and took out the seashell he'd given me. "Think in tides, not waves," I whispered. "The sea isn't just waves, it has tides. It ebbs and returns in its own rhythm." Maybe this was my tide turning. 3 days later, I signed all the documents and sent them back to Savannah. She filed them with the local notary in Charleston. I didn't tell Margaret. I didn't call Madeline. I didn't mention it to Thomas. There was no need to explain. I was just following the law and my memories. That Friday morning, I received an email from Savannah. The property at 42 Seaside Bluff has been temporarily transferred to Ellie Ventnor for management. The formal review process is underway. I printed the email, placed it on my small dining table, and stared at it like something sacred. Not a victory, not revenge, just confirmation. I hadn't imagined it all. I hadn't fabricated those summers with my father. I wasn't forgotten, just obscured. That evening, I packed a suitcase. My flight to Charleston was booked. I hadn't told anyone I was going. No one needed to know. This wasn't a journey for others. On the plane, I sat by the window, watching thin clouds drift by like the breath of memory. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from anyone. I was coming home. The plane landed in the late afternoon. The humid southern air greeted me with a familiar breath. I called a taxi, and when the driver heard the address, he turned to look at me. The white wooden house at the end of Bluff. That place has been empty for a while. But it's beautiful, peaceful. I just nodded. Peaceful. Maybe for the first time I truly understood what that word meant. I still remember the feeling of stepping into the wooden house at Seaside Bluff for the first time in over 2 decades. The doors creaked, dust hung thick, the air heavy with time and silence. But there was something else, a strange sense that this place was still holding a secret. Something not of the past, but of the present, even the future. I didn't know that the phone call from Savannah the next morning would change everything. "Ellie, I need you to listen carefully," she said over the phone. "I think there's something off about your father's death." I thought I misheard. "What do you mean he died when I was 12? I attended the funeral. Yes, there was a ceremony, a death certificate. But I just checked federal records. No Thomas Ventnor appears in the National Death Database." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Savannah continued, her voice low. "When I reviewed the trust fund accounts, I found medical payments being made regularly for the past 3 years. To a private nursing home called Shoreline House in North Carolina. The recipient's name is Thomas Ventnor." Part of me surged with confusion and anger, but another part, the one I'd always suppressed, felt this wasn't entirely a surprise. Deep down, I'd suspected. I'd noticed how my mother dodged questions about his death, how she refused to let me see his body, how she quashed every effort to keep his memory alive. And I, like an obedient child, had believed her. I asked Savannah if she was sure. She sent me copies of the detailed records, insurance codes, signed service receipts, and the nursing home's address. A facility that didn't publish patient lists, had no official website, and wasn't even on Google. It was as if it was deliberately hidden from the world. I didn't call Margaret. I didn't ask Madeline. I knew I wouldn't get answers. And honestly, I no longer trusted them to tell the truth if cornered. The next morning, I drove over 2 hours to North Carolina, winding through coastal roads, trees rustling the air thick with salt. On the map, Shoreline House was just a vague coordinate. I only found it thanks to a faded number on an old stone wall tucked among dense pines. The iron gate opened after I showed my ID and signed a confidentiality agreement. The nursing home wasn't what I'd imagined. No hospital beds, no rushing nurses, no antiseptic smell. It was too quiet, as if the people living there didn't exist. A nurse led me to room 18. He's been here nearly 3 years. Rarely gets visitors. But he's still alert, she said, knocking lightly on the weathered white wooden door. The door opened, and the moment I saw him, time froze. He was much thinner, his hair completely silver. But those eyes... I could never forget those eyes. My father. He looked up at me, his eyes widened, lips trembling. Ellie. I didn't answer. I just walked toward him, sat down, and took his hand. His hand was cold, fragile, but real. "It's me," I said without a single tear. We sat together in silence. No explanations needed. No need to start over. He was still alive, and I still had a part of myself that hadn't been stolen. In that moment, I knew everything my family had built. The death, the will, the distorted memories wasn't just forgetting. It was deliberate, a cover-up. And my father was the last living witness. I don't remember how long I sat beside him in that small room. Time passed as if measured by his faint breaths, slow quiet, as if he feared breathing too fast would make this moment vanish. I held his hand. It was bony veins prominent under thin skin, but the warmth was still there. A warmth that couldn't be faked. "You came," he said softly, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "They told me. You didn't want to see me anymore." It felt like someone had crushed my heart. My throat went dry. Not from surprise, but from anger. Anger at the years gone by, at the deception cloaked in family ties, at myself for staying silent too long. "I didn't know anything I whispered. They never told me you were alive." He closed his eyes. I saw his lips tremble, whether from emotion or age. I wrote letters, called, sent photos. But then they said you didn't want contact, that you chose to stay with your mother and Madeline. I didn't want to force you. Part of me wanted to cry, but the part used to swallowing pain since childhood just held his hand tighter. They never gave me anything I said. No calls, no letters. I never received them. We sat in silence a while longer. My father looked out at the garden where pale purple lavender swayed in the breeze. "This place has a small garden," he said. "I go there every morning. It reminds me of you. When you were little, you loved picking lavender to dry in your notebook." I smiled faintly. I still have that notebook. At home. Neither of us mentioned my mother or Madeline again. The name Margaret, still bearing the Ventnor surname, felt out of place in this room. I think at some point she chose the easier path, erasing my father from both our lives to maintain an order she could control. And Madeline, as always, was the perfect silent accomplice. My father said he was brought to Shoreline House after a minor stroke. They said it was best for me. I didn't resist. I thought if you didn't want to see me, at least, I could hold on to memories of you. I wondered if someone lived decades believing their daughter had rejected them. How much loneliness did they endure? How many nights did he wake from dreams hoping to say my name without feeling loss? I asked if he wanted to walk to the garden. He nodded. I pushed his wheelchair through the quiet hallway down the old red brick path to the secluded garden behind the facility. The breeze was gentle. Birds sang. The lavender he mentioned scented the air. The garden was small, maybe 10 square meters, but serene and tender. I wheeled him to a stone bench. He reached out, touching a lavender sprig. "They're still as purple as the ones you used to press in your book, but now I have no one to give them to." I sat beside him, resting my head on his shoulder. "Next time I'll come back. Not alone." He turned his eyes bright with surprise and hope. "You mean, we'll have an outdoor lunch. I'll bring things you like, and a few people I think you need to see again." I didn't elaborate, but in my heart I was thinking of Savannah. And one other person, someone who'd change the entire game with the truth about this family. I once thought returning was symbolic, as if stepping through the old house's door would restore what was lost whole and untouched. But it wasn't. Returning was a series of small, quiet, patient acts, signing each page with the care of someone reclaiming their voice, writing my name on the booking form with a steady hand, walking slowly through the empty house not to possess, but to listen. I finalized the transfer of Seaside Bluff a week after meeting my father. Savannah sent me the notarized confirmation. For the first time, I was the legal owner of a place that was my blood and bone. I didn't cry when I signed. I didn't feel triumphant. The feeling, if I could name it, was the lifting of silence. The house was the same dark tiled roof, railings faded by sea air, the wooden door creaking familiarly as I pushed it open. But inside it was different. Empty, like a stage abandoned mid-performance. And I was the only one who remembered the script. I booked the living room under Ellie Ventnor. No notes, no hiding. For the first time, my name wasn't reduced to Madeline's sister or Margaret's daughter. Just me, whole and complete. I spent the next 3 days doing something I'd never done in my adult life, caring for a place as if it deserved love. I cleaned every stair-replaced yellowed curtains. I brought back old items from storage, the ceramic vase my father used for flowers, the wooden frame etched with summer '98 that had vanished. I hung a photo of me and my father at the beach when I was 8. The light in the photo slanted across his hair, and I was smiling unaware of the camera. There was a moment in the kitchen holding the seashell wind chime, his gift, when I paused for a long time. The cord was frayed, some shells cracked. I sat down, replaced the cord, and wiped each piece with a soft cloth. When the breeze came through the window, the sound was faint, clear, and achingly familiar. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I didn't want to use the law to block them. I didn't call my mother. I didn't email Madeline. What I was doing wasn't retaliation. It was a journey to reclaim my place, not with power, but with resolve. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't forgiving others. It's forgiving yourself for accepting invisibility too long, for staying silent, yielding, crossing your own name, off what was rightfully yours. I thought of others like me, children quietly excluded from family circles without declaration or reason. Have you ever been there? Still present, still alive, still loving, but your name erased. If so, I hope you'll leave a line. Maybe, like me, you need to know you're not alone. That evening I stood on the porch listening to the wind chime's faint melody, like an old note reawakened. The sky was veiled in thin mist, the breeze carrying salt and the faint decay of pine. I stood there a long time doing nothing, just staying, and then I decided it was time to bring my father home. Nothing disarms people like indulged habits. My family, especially Margaret and Madeline, was used to claiming every space they entered as theirs as a given. So when they arrived at Seaside Bluff on Saturday morning at 9:00 as they did every year for the Anderson family retreat, I knew what was coming. And I was ready, using the same silence they'd wielded to exclude me. I stood inside behind the living room curtain watching the white SUV pull up. Margaret stepped out first in ivory linen eyes, hidden by expensive sunglasses. Madeline followed, pulling a suitcase, laughing into her phone. My two nieces, whom I'd barely hugged, jumped out, last iPads in hand, oblivious to their surroundings. At the small check-in desk outside, a young woman in a uniform held a list. She politely told Margaret, "I'm sorry, your name isn't on the reservation list." I saw my mother pause. She removed her sunglasses, her voice sharper than usual. "Check again, dear. Margaret Ventnor, host of the Anderson family gathering every year." The clerk courteously, "I'm sorry, but the list was updated this morning. No one named Ventnor." Madeline cut in, forcing a smile. "Maybe a technical error. Try Madeline Ross, or under the family trust account." I opened the door. I stepped out, slow and deliberate, standing on the gravel yard, where they'd set up outdoor dining in years past. The air felt heavier than the morning mist. "I made the reservation," I said, eyes locked on my mother, "and I'm the legal owner of this house." Margaret turned, looking at me like I was a mirage. "Ellie." "Hello, Mother," I said calmly. "Please leave the premises. This is private property. If needed, I'll call my lawyer. No shouts. No accusations. Just a dry silence spreading like a crack." Everyone stood still. Even the kids looked up from their screens. I felt Madeline's eyes on me, not angry, but incredulous. That I, the one they'd carefully erased from every list, could keep them from crossing that familiar threshold. Margaret stepped toward me, silent. She looked around at the wind chime. I'd fixed my father's photo on the shelf, the faint cinnamon scent from an old candle I'd lit in the kitchen. And she understood nothing here was hers anymore. I didn't break her gaze. I let the silence do what words couldn't. After a moment, she turned. "Let's go," she said to Madeline, her voice curt and dry. They dragged their luggage back to the car. I didn't follow. I didn't slam the door like in the movies. I just stood there. The sea breeze blew through, carrying away the trembling in my body. I was still whole. That afternoon, I cleaned the kitchen. Alone. No voices, no chatter. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt at ease, even relieved. I brewed a pot of black tea, took it to the porch, and sat on the wooden chair my father had made. The sky tilted with sunlight. Birds sang, and I knew I'd just stepped out of a lifelong phase. I always knew it wouldn't end quietly. My family, especially Madeline, wasn't the type to retreat silently, but I didn't expect their retaliation to come so fast, or so vicious. On Tuesday morning, as I poured coffee in the kitchen, a message popped up from Grace, an old colleague from my San Francisco investment firm. "You okay with a link?" I clicked without thinking. It was a local morning news segment. A 3-minute report opening with an aerial shot of the Seaside Bluff house, somber music playing. The anchor's voice intoned, "A daughter returns and takes a home from her own father." now living in a nursing home with declining health. I stood frozen in the kitchen. My father's image was spliced in blurry behind a curtain. The anchor continued. According to a close family source, the father was unaware his property had been transferred and was never consulted. A close family source. I didn't need to guess. The wording had Madeline's polish calculated venomous, always playing the victim. The report didn't name me, but it was clear who that daughter was. I don't remember when I sat down. My head spun. I knew the truth wasn't there, but I also knew that to most outsiders, the image of me seizing my father's house would tug at their sympathies more than a tangled tale of Will's fallback clauses and years of being erased from the family tree. I stayed silent. No social media posts. No replies to the probing messages starting to trickle in. Instead, I opened my laptop, created a folder named Truth, and began dragging files in. First was the video I'd recorded with my father in the lavender garden, where he clearly said my name acknowledged me as his daughter and recounted sending letters and calls that went unanswered. Next were old voicemail recordings, Madeline's cold, commanding messages sometimes with lines like, "Don't make more trouble, Ellie. Mom's tired of you." I had an email from last year from Margaret stating, "If you can't understand your place in this family, it's best to stay away from important occasions." Nothing was overtly abusive, but together each piece pointed to one thing I'd been deliberately excluded. I contacted a journalist I'd met in my finance days, someone reputable who'd covered complex property disputes. I didn't beg. I just sent all the documents with a note, "You're the only one I trust to tell this story as it happened." 3 hours later, he replied, "This story needs to be told. But I won't write it as retaliation. I want readers to understand the why, not just feel angry." I agreed. I didn't need people to take my side. I just needed the truth to exist undistorted, unedited, to fit the victim narrative my family tried to craft. That evening, I video called my father. I told him everything. He went quiet, then said, "No one can take you from me, Ellie. No matter how hard they try, you're still my daughter." I cried. Not from anger, but because for the first time I heard a confirmation that couldn't be undone. I once thought going to court was for others wealthy people who'd lost their decency in disputes. I never imagined standing in a courtroom facing my mother and sister as a defendant accused of elder abuse and manipulating my father's emotions to seize his property. The summons arrived in a yellow envelope with a court stamp. I opened it while preparing lunch, my knife pausing mid-air over an apple as I read allegation that the defendant used psychological influence to manipulate Thomas Ventnor in a weakened state to seize property ownership. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. Just a weary sadness. Because even with the truth laid bare, they chose denial. Madeline, in her cold-toned lawsuit, called me an unstable element in the family structure, as if I were a glitch, not a person. The trial was set for a Friday morning in Charleston's civil court. I arrived early in a simple gray suit, no heavy makeup. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to prove. In the courtroom, my mother sat rigid, her gaze icy. Madeline beside her held a thick file like an actor who'd memorized the script. Their lawyer began by painting me as the estranged daughter out of contact for over a decade, then cited my sudden return to exploit a frail old man for his assets. I sat still, expressionless. I'd prepared for this. Then it was my turn. I presented the video from Shoreline House where my father opened the transfer agreement saying clearly, "I want Ellie to have the house. She's the only one who ever listened to me." I submitted medical records proving he was fully lucid and capable of decisions when signing. I shared messages and recordings where my mother and Madeline's words were unmistakable about keeping me out of the picture. I looked at the judge. "I'm not asking for pity. I ask one thing, let the truth exist. I didn't take what wasn't mine. I reclaimed what they took from me." No one spoke. The air thickened. I saw Margaret look away, not from shame, from defeat. She wasn't used to that. The ruling came late that afternoon. The judge dismissed the lawsuit, affirming all property transfers were legal, executed by someone with full capacity. He added, "There's no evidence the defendant exerted negative influence." Conversely, the defendant provided records showing systematic exclusion by the family. I left the courtroom without looking back. No need to look. From now on, no matter how they spun the story, the legal record held the truth, and no one could erase it. That evening, I sat with my father on the porch. The sea breeze was gentle, the seashell chime tinkling faintly. "Did you tell the truth?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. And this time someone listened. I spent Sunday afternoon writing handwritten letters. Not emails, not texts. I sat at the old oak dining table where my father taught me math in 3rd grade and carefully penned each line in ink on thick cream paper, my handwriting soft and simple. If you still wish to come this time, I'm inviting you. I don't know what drove me to do it. Maybe it was the sense of reaching the end of a battle I never wanted to start. Maybe it was for my father, who still looked at the world with gentle eyes, despite it turning away from him. Or maybe I didn't want to become the version they'd painted petty bitter the victor in a family game. I sealed each envelope, addressing them by hand. One for Margaret. One for Madeline. One for Uncle Arthur and Aunt Vivian, who'd said, "We don't take sides," meaning they sided with the stronger party. I didn't expect them to come. But I wanted them to know no one was barred from this house. No one was excluded. I'd just taken the role of the one extending the invitation. The day of the gathering was clear with a light breeze. I woke early, brewed tea, arranged flowers, baked an apple pie from my father's recipe. The scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen like a note of memory. I set the table, simply ivory tablecloth, old porcelain dishes, a family photo from the summer of 1996, once hidden away, now framed and hung as a reminder that there was a time we weren't like this. My father wore a white shirt, his silver hair neatly combed. He asked, "Do you think they'll come?" I looked at him. I don't know. But today that doesn't matter anymore. By afternoon, the first car arrived Uncle Arthur's. He stepped out, glancing around, hesitant. Aunt Vivian followed. They brought no gifts offered, no apologies. But they came, and sometimes presence is its own statement. An hour later, Madeline appeared. She walked slowly in a modest dress, minimal makeup. Her eyes were shadowed, tired. I didn't see the old arrogance. Instead, a woman stood before her childhood home, unsure if she'd be allowed in. I opened the door, said nothing, just stepped aside, and she crossed the threshold. Near the end of the meal, the gate opened again. Margaret. She wore a plain black outfit, no jewelry. Her hands were empty. She paused at the steps, looking at my father in the living room, golden light falling softly on his shoulders. Her eyes softened, not with joy, but with an inability to hide anymore. The truth was there. He was alive, and he was smiling. No one asked why she came. No one blamed her for the years past. My father just nodded faintly, like someone who'd forgiven long ago. The meal passed quietly. No arguments, no miraculous reconciliations. We ate, talked just enough. Each of us seemed to be retracing memories, testing if we could step back into a circle once broken. When my father raised his tea glass, he said simply, "Thank you for coming. I've waited a long time." I looked around. Part of me couldn't believe this was happening. Not because it was warm, but because it was so ordinary. Sometimes ordinary is the hardest thing to achieve after trust has been torn apart. As everyone left, I walked my father to the garden to breathe the night sea air. He said, "You did what even I couldn't." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew he was talking about forgiveness. No one apologized. There were no tearful confessions or regretful hugs. But I realized sometimes remorse doesn't come in words. It comes in averted glances when eyes meet. In a hand resting lightly on a shoulder when no one's watching. In their choice to stay a little longer rather than leaving right after the meal. That evening they returned to the house not for a ritual or a scheduled gathering, but for... I'm not sure. Maybe curiosity, maybe my father. Maybe because they weren't certain anymore what family structure they'd clung to for so long. I prepared a simple dinner mushroom soup, toasted bread, warm almond salad. My father sat at the head of the table, slowly cutting bread, his eyes glowing with a peace I hadn't seen since we reunited. My mother sat across for once without a phone or papers. She ate quietly, and sometimes I caught her looking at my father not with blame, but like someone revisiting a memory long untouched. Madeline was there beside me. No small talk, no jabs. She was quiet most of the time, serving food to her kids, and occasionally reminding them not to play with their forks. But in one moment, as I stood to get more water, she placed her hand on mine and held it. No words, just a brief squeeze almost missable, but I saw it, and I kept it. The dinner ended in calm stillness, a rare air for past gatherings. No one competed to speak or control the narrative. We just sat there, as if relearning how to exist together without hurting each other more. As they prepared to leave, my mother surprised me most. She picked up my father's old Nikon camera from the shelf, the one he used to photograph me at the beach as a child. She wiped the lens, checked the memory card, and said quietly, "Can we take a photo?" Everyone hesitated. No one objected, but I saw surprise in their eyes. Then Madeline, breaking the tension, nodded and signaled the kids to stay. My father, leaning on his cane, came to me and took my hand. I stood in the middle, not by arrangement, just because they placed me there. No one said stand here or get in the center. But Madeline's hand touched my shoulder from behind. My father stood to my left, still holding my hand. And my mother, the person I'd felt most estranged from, raised the camera, adjusted the angle, and said softly, "Look here." I looked. The porch's golden light glowed, cinnamon lingered in the air, and the shutter clicked. The photo was taken not out of duty or tradition, but because in that moment we understood I was indispensable. Not because I'd won a place, because I'd always belonged from the start. I began cleaning the house early in the morning before the sun fully rose, and the sea still breathed softly outside. Savannah arrived earlier than planned, bringing a box of pastries and a warm pot of coffee, as she always did when she sensed I needed someone. She didn't talk much, just bowed deeply to my father and rolled up her sleeves to help me clean. We moved from the living room to the porch, then the kitchen. Each item was wiped by hand, not because it was dirty, but because I wanted to feel every corner again this time, by choice, not nostalgia. I rehung the seashell wind chime on the porch. The sea breeze was gentle, but enough to make the shells clink, producing a faint, tender sound. I stood beneath it, eyes closed. That sound was no longer memory. It was now. Savannah picked up an unwashed wine glass from last night. "Want to keep this? I remember it was your father's." I nodded. "I'll wash it by hand." We didn't need to say this was the last cleaning like this. The house was no longer a battleground, not a repository of painful memories or proof of who won or lost. Now it was home. Imperfect, but real. As afternoon fell, Savannah left, leaving me with the oak table where my father used to read the paperwork and jot brief thoughts in his old leather notebook. I opened my own journal pen ready, and I wrote. Not to recount, but to preserve. What I wrote wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. And if someone finds it later, I hope they'll understand presence doesn't need validation to have value. I wrote. Today I rehung the wind chime, dusted the frame, washed my father's wine glass. Savannah asked if I regretted going so far, only to return to a place that hurt me. I think the answer is no. I never left this place. They just chose not to see me. But I'm here. Always have been. I stopped writing. The words lay there calm and certain like the me of now. When I stepped onto the porch again, the sky had darkened, but the light inside was still warm. And for the first time, I didn't feel on the sidelines of any story. I was in the center. No need to fight. No need to shout to be heard. We don't need recognition to have worth. Some relationships never come with apologies, but you can still choose to end them with grace. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't for their peace, it's so you can move forward without carrying their shadow in your heart. My story isn't just about reclaiming an old house or confronting family. It's about finding myself amid pain, misunderstanding, and prolonged silence. I've learned that not everyone born under the same roof will understand or love you rightly. But you can still choose how to love, not with submission, but with resolve and grace. I also realized that sometimes just being present is a way to heal. Don't let anyone else write your life story. Stand up, step into the light, and say I'm here. And I'm worthy. If you've ever felt abandoned or forgotten, I hope my story helps you believe you're not alone. And love, if it remains, can return in a different, truer, more beautiful form. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or follow my channel as we continue telling real stories for hearts that never give up.